Lucas thought he knew everything about his family, till he found a familiar face staring back at him from the obituary section. The old man who had been giving him life advice at the park bench for months was supposed to be dead for over 20 years. His mother had sworn it. His family had built their entire story around this lie. Now, everything Lucas believed about his life was about to crumble, one devastating truth at a time. Every morning at 7 a.m., Lucas would jog through Central Park on his way to work. It was his ritual, his moment of peace before facing another day at the corporate office. And every morning, without fail, there was the old man sitting on the same weathered bench near the pond. Silver-haired, wearing a faded brown coat, always feeding pigeons from a small paper bag. At first, Lucas just nodded politely as he passed by. But one rainy Tuesday, something made him stop. The old man looked lonely, almost forgotten by the world rushing past him. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" the stranger said with a warm smile that reminded Lucas of something he couldn't quite place. That simple greeting became the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Day after day, Lucas found himself lingering by the bench, sharing coffee and conversation with this mysterious gentleman who seemed to know so much about life. The old man never spoke about himself, but his advice was profound. When Lucas struggled with his demanding boss, the old man said, "Patience, son. Every storm teaches us how to dance in the rain." When Lucas felt lost about his future, the old man would smile knowingly and say, "The best chapters of your story haven't been written yet." There was something magical about these morning conversations. The old man's eyes held a depth that spoke of decades of experience, joy, and heartbreak. His voice carried the weight of wisdom, and somehow Lucas felt understood in a way he never had before. For 3 months, this became Lucas's anchor, the daily dose of guidance that kept him grounded. But most intriguingly, the old man sometimes shared memories that felt strangely familiar to Lucas, as if they were echoes of stories he'd heard in childhood dreams. As weeks passed, Lucas found himself sharing more and more with the old man. He talked about his childhood, his dreams, his fears about not living up to his potential. The old man listened with such intense attention, as if every word mattered deeply to him. "Tell me about your family," the old man asked one autumn morning, his voice carrying an unusual tension. Lucas spoke about his mother, Sarah, who had raised him alone after his father left when he was just 2 years old. He mentioned how his mother always grew quiet and distant whenever he asked about his grandparents. "She says they died before I was born," Lucas explained. "Some kind of accident. She never talks about it." The old man's hands trembled slightly as he scattered breadcrumbs for the pigeons. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the people we love most are the ones who carry the heaviest secrets." There were moments when Lucas caught the old man staring at him with an expression he could undecipher. It looked like longing mixed with profound sadness. Once, when Lucas mentioned his birthday, the old man whispered, "October 15th. I'll never forget that date." When Lucas asked how he knew, the old man just smiled mysteriously and changed the subject. The old man began sharing more personal stories, though he was always vague about details. He talked about a daughter who had cut him out of her life over a misunderstanding that grew too big to bridge. He spoke about a grandson he'd never met, but thought about every single day. "I used to imagine what he'd look like," the old man said, his eyes glistening. "What kind of man he'd become, whether he'd have his mother's stubborn streak or his grandfather's love for morning walks." Lucas felt an inexplicable connection to these stories, as if they were puzzle pieces floating just out of reach of his understanding. Then came the morning that changed everything. Lucas arrived at the bench to find it empty. He waited for an hour, thinking maybe the old man was just running late. The next day, the bench was empty again. And the day after that, a week passed, then 2 weeks. Lucas felt genuinely worried, and surprisingly heartbroken. This stranger had become such an important part of his daily routine that his absence left a gaping hole in Lucas's morning ritual. On a cold Friday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the old man's disappearance, Lucas stopped by the local coffee shop near the park. There, lying on the counter, was yesterday's newspaper. His heart stopped when he saw the obituary section. The photograph staring back at Lucas from the newspaper was unmistakable. Those same kind eyes, the familiar warm smile, the silver hair he'd grown to recognize from 50 yards away. But the name beneath the photo sent shockwaves through his entire world. Robert Thomas Mitchell, beloved father and grandfather. passed away peacefully on November 3, 2024. Lucas's hands shook as he read further, survived by his daughter Sarah Mitchell and grandson Lucas Mitchell. The coffee cup slipped from Lucas's trembling fingers, crashing to the floor in slow motion. Sarah Mitchell was his mother. Lucas Mitchell was ... him. This old man, the stranger who had become his mourning confidant, his source of wisdom and comfort, was Robert Mitchell, his grandfather, his supposedly dead grandfather. According to the obituary, Robert had been living alone in a small apartment just 3 blocks from the park. He'd been battling lung cancer for the past year, but had chosen to face it quietly, without burdening his estranged family. The funeral had been 2 days ago, a small private ceremony that Lucas knew nothing about. But none of this made sense. Lucas's mother had told him his entire life that both his grandparents had died in a car accident before he was born. She'd shown him fake sympathy whenever he asked about them, claiming it was too painful to discuss. She'd even created elaborate stories about how much they would have loved him, how proud they would have been. Every morning conversation flashed through Lucas's mind like a movie reel. The way Robert had looked at him with such intensity, the knowing smiles, the stories about the grandson he'd never met, the intimate knowledge of Lucas's birthday, the profound sadness in his eyes whenever Lucas mentioned his family. Robert hadn't been giving advice to a random stranger in the park. He'd been treasuring stolen moments with the grandson he'd been denied the chance to know, savoring every precious minute while battling a terminal illness alone. That evening, Lucas confronted his mother with the newspaper clutched in his shaking hands. Sarah's face went white when she saw the obituary, and 25 years of carefully constructed lies began to crumble. Through tears, she confessed that Robert had tried to contact them many times over the years. He'd sent birthday cards, Christmas gifts, letters begging for forgiveness for whatever mistake had driven them apart. Sarah had hidden everything, still nursing old wounds from a childhood argument that had grown into a decades-long grudge. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thought he'd only bring pain into our lives. I was wrong, Lucas. I was so terribly wrong." Lucas spent the next week reading through a box of letters his grandfather had sent over the years. Letters his mother had hidden in the attic. Each one was filled with love, hope, and the desperate wish to be part of his grandson's life. In the final letter, dated just 2 weeks before Robert's death, he wrote, "I've been meeting a young man at the park who reminds me so much of the grandson I'll never know. He gives me hope that somewhere out there, Lucas is growing into the kind of man I always dreamed he'd become." Standing at Robert's grave for the first time, Lucas whispered, "Thank you for those mornings, Grandpa. Thank you for finding a way to be part of my story, even when the world tried to keep us apart. Sometimes the people we need most find us in the most unexpected ways." Robert and Lucas's story reminds us that love transcends every barrier, even death itself. Their morning conversations at that park bench became a bridge between generations, proof that family bonds can survive any storm. If this story touched your heart and made you think about the connections that matter most in your life, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that move hearts and change perspectives. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late for love and forgiveness.